I knocked. The door opened. The man's mug slipped and shattered at my feet. "Jake," he whispered. My father, dead 26 years, knew my name. But to understand that moment, you need to know what came before. I grew up believing my father was dead. My mom told me he died in a house fire when I was 3. After that, she never said his name again. Not once. I'm 29 now, and for all those years I carried that silence like static on a radio you can't tune out. Then last month, everything cracked. It started with something boring. I gave blood at a mobile clinic parked outside a big box grocery store off Glenwood Avenue in Raleigh, North Carolina. I'd just gone in for paper towels and protein bars. A volunteer in a bright red vest caught my eye and said, 15 minutes, 3 lives. I'd never donated before. Figured, why not? Do a little good, grab my snacks, get on with my Saturday. A week later, my phone buzzed while I was flushing a radiator at the shop. The number was unfamiliar. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me answered. "Is this Jacob Miller?" The voice asked. Calm, professional, but weighted. "Yeah, Jake," I said, wiping grease on a rag. "This is Dr. Arjun Patel from the Piedmont Donor Network. I'm calling regarding your recent donation. Your results flagged an anomaly, nothing dangerous to you but significant. We need you to follow up." "Follow up how?" I asked. My stomach had already tightened. Words like anomaly don't land soft. "We found a close genetic match in our research database. If you want answers, there's a counselor in Chicago who can meet you, off the record." Chicago? I'd never been. No family there, no friends. He wouldn't explain more over the phone, only that this was about my family. He read off the address, 1431 North Fremont Street. I scribbled it on the back of a receipt with a stubby pencil we keep by the register. My hands shook. That night, I sat across from my mom at our little kitchen table. Linda Miller, hair shot through with silver, scrubs still on, coffee gone cold beside her wrist. Looked like a person who holds other people's pain for a living. She's a nurse, the strongest person I know. I wanted to tell her about the call. I wanted to ask her, really ask her, for the truth. But when I looked at her face, I saw the same shadow that had lived there my entire life. I couldn't do it. I slid the receipt into my wallet and told myself I was being dramatic. The next 3 days, I dropped wrenches, forgot torque specs, and nearly drove a Civic off a lift because my head kept leaving the bay and sprinting to a brownstone on a street I'd never seen. On the 4th night, I broke. I booked a last-minute flight to O'Hare with a backpack and a dumb kind of faith. Before I left, I called my mom. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, honey," she said, tired. "I need to know about Dad." My voice surprised me. Steady, almost flat. "I got a call from the donor people. They gave me an address in Chicago." Silence. Then, "Jake, please don't go." When I told her the address was in Chicago, she dropped her coffee cup. It shattered on the tile, and she just stood there, frozen, like she'd heard a ghost. Her tone sharpened, like a door slamming softly. Some doors should stay closed. She'd said that to me before. When I was 16 and asked why there were no photos. When I was 21 and asked who came to my christening. Always that same sentence, like a prayer that doubles as a warning. "That's why I have to go," I said. "I can't keep pretending half of me never existed." On the other end of the line, I heard her choke back a sob. "You don't understand what you're walking into." "Then tell me," I said, barely breathing. "Tell me what I'm walking into." "I can't." The word cracked. The canyon between us widened. I realized, maybe for the first time, that whatever truth she carried was heavier than my need for it. So I hugged her in our cramped doorway before dawn, whispered that I loved her, and wheeled my backpack to my car. She didn't try to stop me again. She just stood there, hands white on her coffee mug, as if she were holding on to the last warm thing in the world. Airports are chaos. That day, chaos felt like cover. The mechanical calls for boarding zones and a crowded terminal. Voices bouncing off glass made my own crisis feel small and anonymous. For an hour, I could just be a guy waiting for a flight, not a man whose entire life was about to split open. I watched a little boy chase his rolling suitcase and wondered if my father had ever watched me run like that. The thought landed in my chest and rattled around. On the plane, I stared at the address on my phone screen until the letters blurred. 1431 North Fremont Street. I zoomed out on the map. Lincoln Park. Ordinary block. It would almost be easier if it were a hospital or a government office, something official. But a neighborhood? That meant this was personal. I tried to sleep and couldn't. My brain kept drafting fathers I'd never met. A good man in a bad situation. A bad man who made good excuses. A coward. A hero. A ghost. When we landed, Chicago rose around me. Steel and glass and river and speed. Chicago hit me fast. Steel, glass, and speed all at once. I rode the blue line, checked into a tiny hotel with rattling AC, and stared at the ceiling, wide awake. I didn't call my mom. I already knew what she'd say. The next morning I walked. The air off the lake was cool and tasted like metal. I turned onto Fremont and counted addresses like I was walking down a countdown. 1423. 1427. 1431. A narrow brick building with a small iron railing and a door that looked ordinary in the way boxes look ordinary before you open them. I stood there with my hand hovering inches from the wood. I wanted to run, to go back to my room, to the airport, to Raleigh, to a life made of safe lies. But then I saw my reflection in the glass. A man who had spent more than 2 decades running laps around a silence. Enough. I knocked. Footsteps. The door swung open. A man stood there holding a mug. He was tall, shoulders a little slumped, hair dark with strands of gray threading through. Lines mapped his face, but his eyes, hazel, bright even in the hallway light, hit me like a mirror. He froze. The mug slipped. Porcelain exploded on the stone. Coffee streaked my sneaker. He whispered my name. Not sir. Not hello. Not who are you. He said, Jake. Like he was saying son and sorry and thank God all at once. Ah, yeah, I said, voice gone rough. I'm Jake. He braced a hand on the doorframe like he needed it to hold him up. Tears swelled fast. I'm Michael, he said. Michael Carter. He swallowed, and the words tumbled out raw. I'm your father. The hallway rushed loud in my ears. There was a wild urge to swing, fists, words, anything, and an equally wild urge to collapse. All I could do was stand there, breathing. You're supposed to be dead, I said, and it came out more like an accusation than a fact. Please, he said, stepping aside. Come in. Let me explain. I walked past him because I had to, because my feet were moving, because 26 years had led me to that doorway, and momentum can be a kind of courage. His apartment was small and cluttered. Books stacked in towers, papers pinned with receipts, the faint smell of coffee and old paper. A battered guitar leaned against a bookshelf. A fan hummed in the corner like a persistent thought. He motioned to the couch. I sat. He took the armchair across from me and gripped the edges like he might fall off if he let go. For a long time he just looked at me. The flood of his tears embarrassed me and made me angry and somehow calmed me all at once. I didn't die in a fire, he said finally, voice scraping. I should have. It was meant to kill me. He told me a story. Not all at once, but in pieces that snapped into place like parts on a bench. Back then, his work wasn't exactly legal. He'd gotten tangled with the wrong people while trying to build a contracting business fast. Cutting corners, taking cash, borrowing from investors who didn't use banks. Then the debts came due. Then the threats. Then a match. The night of the fire, he wasn't supposed to be home. Somebody lit the back porch while a second guy watched the front. But a neighbor saw smoke early and called 911. The fire ate the kitchen and took the roof, but he crawled out the side window with his lungs scorched and palms torn up. He ran because he knew if the men who'd started it learned he'd made it, they'd come back and finish the job with us inside. He disappeared. New names, odd jobs, years of living like a rumor. He sent money when he could through a friend of a friend. He watched from a distance exactly twice, once at my middle school soccer game and once when I graduated high school. He said he stood too far back both times and left too soon both times. He said my mom knew he was alive. He said she kept the secret because sometimes love looks like a closed door bolted from the inside. You let me grow up thinking you were dead, I said, my voice as steady as a taut wire. Do you know what that did to me? To her? He winced like I'd hit him. I know what it did to me, he said quietly. And I know that doesn't balance any scales. I thought if you believed I was gone, you wouldn't go looking. I told myself it was protection. I told myself a lot of things so I could sleep. I could feel my jaw clench, knuckles white on my knees. You could have told me when I was older, I said. A letter, a burner phone, anything. You're right. He didn't flinch away from it. I was a coward more often than I was brave. And every day I didn't reach out made the next day harder to try. But I'm here now. If you walk away after this, I'll understand. Just ask me anything. I won't lie. Anger begged for center stage. I made it sit down. My mind raced, searching for the sharpest questions to throw at him. About the money, about the danger he'd left my mom in, about the 26 years of silence. But the words wouldn't form. Underneath the rage was something else. A feeling I couldn't name. It wasn't forgiveness. It was the unnerving recognition of my own eyes staring back at me from a stranger's face. He was a man, not a nightmare or a bedtime story. A man who'd made terrible choices and a few good ones. A man with my eyes. How did the donor network even connect me to you? I asked. He rubbed his face, then pointed to a bulging folder on the coffee table. A year ago, a cousin of mine in Indiana tested for a genetic study. I did too. They keep databases. Matches pop, patterns flag. Somebody saw something. Dr. Patel works with genetic data. He said our markers were such a rare and perfect match that it triggered a series of flags in their system, the kind they usually see with bone marrow registries. He admitted he bent about 6 different rules, but felt ethically obligated to make a call. He gave a short, humorless laugh. We got nudged. I thought of that bus in Raleigh, the red vest, the sting of the needle, and almost laughed too. How ordinary moments carry explosives you can't see. By the time the fan clicked off its timer, the coffee was cold and the skyline was purple. He told me how he'd broken ties with the men who'd burned our life down, how some had gone to prison and some had vanished. He told me how he'd taken jobs under fake names, roofing in Ohio, fishing in Alaska, warehouse night shifts in Nevada. Sleeping sometimes in his truck, sometimes on couches, sometimes in tiny rooms like the one I sat in. He told me he'd been sober for 8 years. He told me he had never stopped loving my mom. He told me he had never stopped loving me. When I left his apartment, Chicago's evening light turned everything the color of honey. I walked until my legs felt hollow. The city roared around me, but inside there was weird quiet. I wasn't sure if I hated him or believed him. I knew only this. For the first time in my life, the shadow of my father had a shape. The next morning, I called my mom from a bench near a park where kids were chasing each other around a fountain. Water caught the sun and broke it into coins. I met him, I said. Her breath hitched. I know, she whispered. I figured you would. You knew he was alive. No accusation. Just a fact laid on a table between us. Yes, she said. He called me the night of the fire from a payphone. I told him to keep running. I told him if he loved you, he'd stay away. I thought that was the only way you'd grow up free. You could have told me, I said, softer than I expected. I know. Her voice broke. I chose the lie that hurt less in the moment and hurt more forever. I'm sorry, Jake. I closed my eyes. My anger at her had never been pure. It was always knotted with gratitude and awe and pity. Hearing her say she was sorry did something to the knot. It didn't untangle it, but it loosened it. I'm coming home tomorrow, I said. When I got back to Raleigh, our apartment felt different, as if the truth had made the walls wider. The evening I arrived, we sat at the same table where we danced around this for years. For once, we didn't dance. He said he watched my graduation, I told her. Way back, by the bleachers. She nodded, a tear sliding down her face. I saw him too, she said. Just for a second. I turned away before I could run to him. I knew I couldn't stand to let go twice. We cried together, The kind of crying that feels less like breaking down and more like finally dropping a load you should never have carried alone. Over the next few weeks, I called Michael every few days. The calls were weird at first, stiff, full of small talk that felt ridiculous given the years between us. But we got better at it. He told me about learning to make the perfect omelet while working a diner griddle at 4 a.m. He told me about a dog he'd had for 6 months in Wyoming and how the dog had rescued him more than once from himself. I told him about the shop, about the satisfaction of coaxing life out of engines, about how my hands always needed to be busy. One Sunday, I asked him the question I'd been circling. "Did you ever think about coming back anyway?" I said. "Even when it wasn't safe?" "Every day," he said. He didn't hesitate. "There's a version of my life where I came back and we all went up in smoke. There's another version where I came back and we were fine. I gambled wrong either way, Jake. I lost years with you to fear. I can say I did it to protect you, and that's true. But it's also true that I was scared and ashamed." The honesty hit me harder than an excuse would have. This isn't a neat story. It doesn't end with a family portrait over a fireplace and all sins washed clean. It's messy and human and full of false starts. But the center of it, the thing that changed me, isn't just that my father was alive. It's that I stopped being the guy who let silence run his life. I didn't forgive him all at once. I didn't forgive my mom all at once. Some days, forgiveness felt like a muscle I didn't own. Other days it surprised me, appearing light and easy, like breathing. The first time Michael came to Raleigh, we met in a crowded diner off Capitol Boulevard so neither of us would have to handle too much quiet. He slid into the booth and looked older than he had in Chicago. Or maybe I just noticed different things on my turf. He ordered coffee, hands shaking a little as he poured cream. "Do you like it?" he asked suddenly, nodding at my mug. "You always hated bitter things when you were a kid." He caught himself and winced. "Sorry. Your mom told me once." "It's fine," I said. "I like bitter now." I took a sip and made a face. "But not this bitter." He laughed, real and quick. A small victory. We talked for 2 hours. About nothing. About everything. He told me he'd taken night classes in accounting. He told me he kept a folder of articles he thought I'd like, about car restorations and lake fishing and a guy who ran a marathon on every continent. He admitted he'd imagined 1,000 ways this conversation could go, and every single one had been worse than this. When he left, we did that awkward half-hug that men do when they're not sure how the other will receive it. He clapped my shoulder, cleared his throat, and walked out into the North Carolina sun. I sat there a long time with my mug and the check and the feeling that the ground had moved under me again, but this time toward something steadier. The next day, the first blowback came. Not from the past, but from the present. The next day, the first blowback came. A guy showed up at the shop. Buzz cut. A tattoo curling up his neck that I'd later recognize from one of my dad's old ledgers. He slid a padded envelope across the counter. "Michael said to tell you some debts are paid, but others have long memories," he said, his voice flat. He gave me a look that was neither friendly nor unfriendly, then turned and walked out, leaving the threat to hang in the air. I flipped it, felt something hard slide inside. My boss, Tony, watched from the back office door, eyebrows up. I opened it with a box cutter. A single house key fell into my palm, heavy and cold. A sticky note clung to the inside of the flap. "For when you're ready," it read. An address in Chicago I didn't know. My pulse thudded. I called Michael from behind the dumpsters, the smell of oil and summer heat thick in the air. "I didn't send that," he said immediately. "But I know the place. It's a storage unit I used to keep. Haven't been there in years." "What's in it?" "Pieces," he said, "of before and after." My first instinct was to toss the key into the storm drain and never think about it again. My second instinct was to book a flight that minute. I didn't do either. I tucked the key into my pocket and went back to work because there's only so much truth you can crack open in a week without cutting your hands. 2 Fridays later, I flew to Chicago again. If this whole mess had taught me anything, it was that running toward the fear beats running from it most days. The storage place was fluorescent and cold, the kind of place that makes you whisper. The lights buzzed overhead like angry bees, and every breath I took echoed as if I were standing inside a metal drum. Unit 2C. The lock resisted, then turned. When I lifted the door, it groaned, and what stared back at me wasn't just boxes. It was a life my father had tried to bury. I opened the boxes methodically because that's how I do everything when I'm scared. I give myself steps. I opened the boxes methodically. One held invoices from his old contracting business, coffee-stained and curling at the edges. Another had water-damaged photographs. My mom laughing in a park, me on her shoulders, both of us looking like life was easy. There were letters he'd written and never mailed, bundled with rubber bands. The oldest was addressed to Little Man. The newest was addressed to Jake Miller, adult, which made me snort. The oldest was addressed to Little Man. The newest was addressed to Jake Miller, adult, which made me snort. I sat on the concrete floor and read until my back screamed. Most of the letters rambled, full of half-finished thoughts and guilty confessions. But one stopped me cold. It was barely a line, written in a rush. Little Man, I stayed away today. You won't remember, but I will. That one hurt more than all the others combined. I had no memory of him being there. But now I knew he had been. Some were ugly confessions. A few were precise, like the writer knew that someday he'd have to put a life into a page and let it speak for him. By then, the concrete floor was freezing against my legs, and the smell of dust and old paper clung to me like a second skin. I felt like I had just dug through someone's grave and found my own reflection staring back. There was also a box I didn't expect. Journals of names and dates, records of people he'd paid back, people he still owed. Next to some names, there were check marks. Next to others, there were question marks. Next to one, there was a single word, gone. I didn't ask who gone was, then or later. Not everything needs to be pulled into the light to lose its power. Walking back to Michael's place, a man's shoulder slammed mine. Too deliberate for an accident, too quiet for a threat. I spun, instincts hot. He kept walking. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was the ghost of the life my father had escaped. I kept my head on a swivel anyway and got inside fast. Michael looked at the stack in my hands and nodded like a man bracing for judgment. I don't need you to read everything, he said. I just needed you to know I didn't forget. I know, I said, surprising both of us. We made omelets in his tiny kitchen. He showed me the fold trick. We ate standing up, leaning on the counter, because there were no chairs that weren't covered in books. He kept catching himself staring at me like he was trying to memorize my face. I pretended not to notice every time, but every time I noticed. I'd love to say it got easier after that day. Didn't, it just got real. There were days I resented him for stealing my childhood even when he was nowhere near me. There were days I resented my mom for deciding what I got to know about my life. There were days I resented myself for needing either of them. There were also tiny victories, quiet, uncinematic moments, that mattered more than any dramatic ending could. The day my mom told me she slept through the night for the first time in years. The day Michael texted me a picture of an old beater Mustang he'd found and asked if I thought we could fix it up together. Sometime, no rush. The day I caught myself telling a story about my dad to a friend and realized I was smiling. The big fall, the worst part, hit 2 months later. My mom had a bad shift. Lost a patient she'd grown close to. She came home early and sat at our table and told me she couldn't do this anymore. The secrets, the balancing act, the whiplash of loving two men who represented two different versions of her life. She said she wanted to sell the apartment, move somewhere quiet, start over. She said she couldn't bear to run into my father at the coffee shop and pretend the air didn't change. We argued. I said things I'm ashamed of. She said things she didn't mean. In the middle of it, she looked at me and said, "Maybe I was wrong to keep him from you." It wasn't an apology this time. It was grief weaponized by exhaustion. I left the apartment and slammed the door and walked until my feet blistered. That week, I didn't answer Michael's calls. I didn't answer my mom's texts. I went to work, lifted engines, came home, watched stupid TV until 2 in the morning, and slept like a guy digging shallow holes. On Friday, I sat on my bedroom floor and stared at the key from the storage unit. It gleamed in the afternoon light, A dumb piece of metal that had altered the shape of my family. I realized I could keep bleeding out alone. Or I could do the thing none of us had done for 26 years. Talk. So I called my mom. Then I called my dad. The next day, we met at a picnic table near Shelley Lake. The bench wobbled. I pulled a wrench from my backpack and fixed the bolt while we talked. Building something together was easier than speeches. 3 people who loved each other and didn't know how to do it well yet. My mom and Michael didn't hug. They didn't need to. They looked at each other for a long time, and I watched 1,000 words pass between them without a sound. Then my mom said, "You're aging badly." Which, for her, is a truce offering. "I deserve worse," he said, and the corner of her mouth lifted a little. We talked. We didn't solve everything, but we put honesty on the table and kept it there. My mom said she wasn't leaving Raleigh. Michael said he'd give us space when we needed it and show up when we asked. I said I wanted to learn how to be a son to 2 people who had been the only parent for me in different ways. We made 0 promises we couldn't keep and 1 we could. No more lies. Here's what I know now. Silence feels safe at first, but it rots you from the inside like rust on steel. Truth didn't give me birthdays back. It gave me a steering wheel. My father didn't rise from the dead. He stepped out of hiding and took responsibility. That didn't give me back birthdays or soccer games or someone to teach me how to throw a curveball. It gave me something else. It gave me a full story. Jagged and messy, but whole. And me? I stopped treating my life like a crime scene. I picked up the pieces and decided to own them. Sometimes in a shop window I see 2 faces at once. My mom's jawline and my dad's grin. Staring back at me from my own reflection. I'll be adjusting a carburetor and feel this jolt of joy because I know whose hands I have and why they shake a little when I'm angry. I'll be sipping coffee too late at night and hear my mom laughing in the kitchen and feel the ground under my feet solidify. The last time I went to Chicago, Michael and I drove out to a junkyard on the edge of the city and found a '68 Mustang half-eaten by rust. We stood there with the sun on our faces and grease under our nails and decided to try to bring it back. Not because we needed a project, but because building something together felt like a way to answer a question we'd both been asking our whole lives without knowing it. Can we make something good out of what we have left? We can. Slowly. With busted knuckles. With swear words and laughter and the kind of silence that isn't a wall anymore but a bridge. One afternoon, Dad and I leaned over a rusted '68 Mustang. The bolt finally cracked loose under our hands. Truth doesn't give you back time, but it gives you back yourself. Hey, if this story made you feel something, drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more.